It looked like the perfect wedding photograph, frozen in time from a summer day in 1903. The formal portrait showed a young couple on their wedding day, surrounded by elaborate floral arrangements and dressed in the finest fashion of the Edwardian era. The bride wore an exquisite white silk gown with layers of lace and delicate embroidery, her face radiant with what appeared to be pure happiness. The groom stood beside her in a perfectly tailored mourning suit, one arm positioned protectively around her waist. When the photograph arrived at the Massachusetts Historical Society in a donation box from an estate sale in Boston, it seemed unremarkable among hundreds of similar images from the early 1900s. Wedding portraits from that era followed strict conventions. Formal poses, serious expressions, elaborate clothing meant to display wealth and social status. This particular photograph had been stored in an album for over a century, yellowed at the edges but remarkably well-preserved. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a specialist in early photography and social history, was cataloging a collection when something about this particular image caught her attention in the spring of 2024. She had examined thousands of Victorian and Edwardian wedding photographs during her career, but this one contained a detail so subtle that it had apparently gone unnoticed for over 120 years. The photograph showed what appeared to be a typical upper-class wedding from the turn of the century. The couple stood in an elaborate studio setting with painted backdrops depicting classical architecture and manicured gardens. The bride's gown featured hundreds of seed pearls sewn into intricate floral patterns, with a veil that cascaded down her back in multiple layers of tulle. Her hair was arranged in the fashionable Gibson girl style, adorned with orange blossoms. A diamond necklace glittered at her throat, suggesting significant family wealth. The groom appeared equally refined, his dark hair pomaded in the style of the era, his expression one of dignified satisfaction. Everything about the image spoke of propriety, wealth, and careful social positioning. The photographer had captured every detail with the technical precision available in 1903. The texture of fabrics, the shimmer of jewelry, the subtle shadows that gave depth to the composition. But when Dr. Chen examined the photograph under magnification as part of the standard cataloging process, she noticed something that transformed the entire image from a celebration of matrimonial joy into something far more disturbing. The bride's left hand, which hung naturally at her side in what should have been a relaxed pose, was actually holding another hand, not the groom's hand, which was clearly visible resting on her waist. This was a different hand, partially concealed by the elaborate folds of the bride's gown and the strategic positioning of a large bouquet of flowers. Under magnification, Dr. Chen could see fingers intertwined with the bride's, belonging to someone who had been carefully positioned just out of the camera's direct view. The discovery sent a chill through Dr. Chen's research. She had studied enough early photography to understand how meticulously these formal portraits were staged. Every detail was intentional, controlled, arranged by the photographer to create specific impressions. Nothing appeared in these images by accident. Long exposure times meant subjects had to hold absolutely still, making every gesture, every positioning, a conscious choice. Someone had deliberately arranged for the bride to hold hands with a hidden figure during her wedding portrait. Someone who couldn't be seen in the photograph itself, but whose presence was documented through that single, partially concealed hand. Dr. Chen adjusted her magnifying equipment, examining the hidden hand more closely. It was clearly feminine, delicate, wearing what appeared to be a simple gold band on the ring finger. The angle suggested someone standing very close to the bride, perhaps slightly behind her, positioned where the camera's frame would cut them off. The bouquet had been strategically placed to provide additional concealment, creating a barrier that made the hand barely visible even under careful examination. The grip between the two hands appeared tight, fingers interlaced in a way that suggested intimacy and perhaps desperation. This wasn't a casual touch or an accidental overlap. This was a deliberate, meaningful connection preserved in the photograph. Dr. Chen felt her pulse quicken with the excitement of discovery and the unsettling implications of what she was seeing. Wedding photographs from this era were public documents, meant to announce and celebrate marriages, to display family wealth and social connections. They were carefully constructed images that conveyed specific messages about respectability, propriety, and adherence to social norms. What possible reason could there be for a bride to secretly hold someone else's hand during her wedding portrait? Who was the hidden figure? And why had this detail remained unnoticed for over a century? The photograph itself provided few additional clues. There was no photographer's mark visible, no studio name embossed in the corner, as was common practice. The back of the photograph bore only a faded inscription in elegant script. June 14, 1903, Boston. No names, no other identifying information. Dr. Chen began searching through the accompanying materials from the estate sale. The photograph had been part of a larger collection donated by the descendants of a prominent Boston family named Ashford. The estate records indicated the materials had belonged to Margaret Ashford, who had died in 1978 at the age of 92. The collection included dozens of photographs, letters, personal diaries, and newspaper clippings spanning from the 1880s through the 1960s. She located several other photographs that appear to show the same bride from the wedding portrait. In one, taken perhaps a year earlier based on fashion and photographic style, a young woman stood in a garden setting with another woman of similar age. Their body language suggested close friendship, or perhaps something more, standing nearer to each other than typical formal photography of the era would suggest. Their hands were clasped together openly, visibly, in a gesture that seemed both innocent and intimate. Another photograph showed the same young woman at what appeared to be a society function, dressed in an elaborate evening gown, surrounded by other women in similar attire. She stood next to a woman who matched the one from the garden photograph, their shoulders touching, their expressions captured in a moment of shared laughter. Dr. Chen found letters tucked into envelopes throughout the collection. Many were routine social correspondence, but several stood out, letters written in passionate, coded language that spoke of devotion that transcends ordinary friendship, and a connection that society cannot understand. Letters signed with initials rather than full names, as if the writers feared their words might be discovered. One letter, dated May 1903, just weeks before the wedding photograph, was particularly revealing. Written in elegant handwriting on expensive stationery, it read, "My dearest M, I cannot bear to think of the day approaching when you must stand beside him and speak vows that deny everything we are to each other. But I will be there as we plan, hidden but present, our hands joined even if the world cannot see. They may force this marriage, but they cannot sever what binds us. Forever yours, C." Dr. Chen sat back, the full implications of her discovery settling over her. This wasn't just an unusual photographic curiosity. This was evidence of a hidden relationship, preserved in a wedding portrait through careful positioning and deliberate defiance. The bride had found a way to document her true feelings, her real connection, even as she went through motions of a socially mandated marriage. The wedding photograph that appeared to show a happy couple actually captured something far more complex. A woman forced into marriage, holding hands with her true love who had been positioned just out of frame, their connection hidden but undeniable to anyone who looked closely enough. Dr. Chen dove deeper into the Ashford family records, determined to identify the women in the photographs and understand their story. The estate donation included detailed genealogical records maintained by Margaret Ashford, who had apparently been a meticulous family historian. The bride in the wedding photograph was identified through cross-referencing as Eleanor Ashford, born in 1881 to one of Boston's most prominent families. Her father, Thomas Ashford, had made his fortune in textile manufacturing and banking. The family maintained a Beacon Hill townhouse and a summer estate in Newport, moving in the highest circles of Boston society. Eleanor had been educated at an exclusive finishing school and had made her society debut in 1899 at age 18. Contemporary newspaper accounts describe her as accomplished, refined, and possessing both intelligence and beauty. She was known for her skill at the piano and her involvement in various charitable organizations. The woman in the garden photograph with Eleanor was identified as Catherine Whitmore, daughter of an equally prominent Boston family, with connections to shipping and real estate. Catherine had attended the same finishing school as Eleanor, and the two had become inseparable friends during their school years. Letters between Eleanor and Catherine, carefully preserved in the collection, documented a relationship that clearly transcended conventional friendship. Written in the coded language women of that era used to express romantic feelings when direct expression was impossible, the letters spoke of special affection, understanding that goes beyond ordinary sentiment, and devotion that makes separation unbearable. One letter from Eleanor to Catherine, dated 1901, was particularly revealing. Dearest C, the hours we spent in the garden yesterday felt like stolen moments from another world, one where we might be free to acknowledge what we are to each other without fear or shame. I treasure every moment, every word, every touch, knowing how rare and precious such freedom is. The correspondence revealed that their relationship had been discovered by Eleanor's family in early 1902. A servant had apparently seen the two women in an embrace and had reported it to Eleanor's mother. The consequences had been swift and severe. Eleanor was forbidden from seeing Catherine except in supervised social settings. Her activities were monitored. Her correspondence was scrutinized, and her family made clear that such unnatural attachments would not be tolerated. The solution, as was common in that era, was marriage. Thomas Ashford arranged for Eleanor to be married to Harrison Chambers, the son of a business associate. Chambers was 35 years old, a widower whose first wife had died in childbirth 2 years earlier. He needed a wife to manage his household and provide him with heirs. Eleanor's feelings were irrelevant to the arrangement. The wedding was scheduled for June 14, 1903. Dr. Chen found newspaper clippings describing the elaborate ceremony held at the Ashford family's Beacon Hill residence. 300 guests attended, and the event was covered extensively in society pages. The accounts described Eleanor as a lovely bride and praised the match as advantageous for both families. But buried in Catherine's personal diary, which was also part of the collection, was the truth behind that perfect wedding. Catherine wrote, June 14, 1903. Today I watched a woman I love marry a man she barely knows and does not love. Her parents stand proud, satisfied that they have corrected her aberrant tendencies through this marriage. They believe they have saved her from scandal and ruin. They have no idea what they have truly done. Catherine described how she and Eleanor had made a plan. Catherine would attend the wedding, as was expected since she and Eleanor were known friends. But during the formal wedding portrait, she would position herself just outside the camera's frame. Eleanor would reach for her hand, and they would hold on to each other during the photograph, their connection documented even if hidden from obvious view. We wanted something to remain true in that portrait, Catherine wrote, something that acknowledged what we really are to each other. Even as Eleanor stood beside a man who will never know her, never understand her, never love her as I do, let the world see a traditional wedding portrait. We know the truth it contains. The plan had worked perfectly. The photographer, focused on capturing the bride and groom in proper formal arrangement, had never noticed a hidden hand-holding. The elaborate bouquet and the folds of Eleanor's gown provided perfect concealment. For 121 years, the secret had remained hidden in the photograph, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see it. Dr. Chen found Eleanor's diary as well, and its entries in the months following her marriage painted a picture of profound unhappiness. Eleanor wrote about the suffocating loneliness of her marriage, about living with a man who viewed her as property and obligation rather than person. She wrote about the social expectations that trapped her, about the impossibility of escaping a marriage even when it caused such suffering. But she also wrote about stolen moments with Catherine. Social conventions allowed women friends to spend time together, to correspond, to visit, as long as everything appeared proper. Eleanor and Catherine had learned to navigate these narrow permissions, finding ways to maintain their connection while hiding its true nature. We had become expert dissemblers, Eleanor wrote in August 1903. We speak in codes, meet in crowds, touch in ways that appear innocent. The world sees two married women maintaining a childhood friendship. We know what we really are, and that knowledge sustains me through days that would otherwise be unbearable. The letters and diaries reveal that Eleanor and Catherine maintained their relationship for decades, hidden behind the acceptable facade of close friendship. Both women remained in their respective marriages, fulfilling social obligations while preserving their true emotional connection in secret. Eleanor had 3 children with Harrison Chambers between 1904 and 1910. She was by all outward measures a devoted mother and proper society wife. But her private writings revealed a woman living a double life, maintaining appearances while her heart belonged elsewhere. Catherine had remarried in 1907 to a man 20 years her senior, another arranged marriage following her first husband's death. Like Eleanor, She bore children and maintained social position while secretly continuing her relationship with Eleanor. The two women corresponded throughout their lives. They found ways to see each other regularly through charitable work, social functions, and visits that appeared entirely innocent. Their letters, written in careful language that could be interpreted as mere friendship if discovered, contained coded expressions of enduring love. Meeting you yesterday in the park, surrounded by our children, and appearing to all the world as two matrons discussing household matters, while actually holding each other's gaze with all the passion we cannot express. Eleanor wrote in 1915, "This is our life. See, stolen glances, coded words, moment of connection hidden in plain sight. It is not what we would have chosen, but it is ours, and it is real." Dr. Chen traced both women's lives through historical records. Eleanor lived until 1958, dying at age 77. Catherine died in 1962 at age 80. They had maintained their relationship for nearly 60 years, hidden behind marriages, children, social obligations, and carefully maintained public images. He lived, explaining the social and legal restrictions that forced LGBTQ+ individuals to hide their identities. It explored how same-sex relationships were systematically erased from historical records, how people developed elaborate strategies for maintaining connections that society deemed unacceptable. Dr. Chen gave talks throughout the exhibition period, discussing how to read historical photographs for hidden meanings, how to recognize coded language in letters and diaries, how to find the stories that were deliberately concealed. She emphasized that countless relationships like Eleanor and Catherine's existed throughout history, but left little trace, because people worked so hard to hide them. We tend to think of LGBTQ+ history as beginning in the mid-20th century with the gay rights movement. Dr. Chen explained to one audience, "But people who loved others of the same sex have existed in every era, every culture. They simply had to hide more carefully, develop more elaborate strategies for maintaining relationships while appearing to conform to social expectations." This photograph is evidence of that hidden history. It shows us that even in moments designed to celebrate heterosexual marriage, some people found ways to document their truth. The wedding photograph became iconic, reproduced in articles, included in documentaries about LGBTQ+ history, featured in academic studies about photography and hidden meaning. But for Dr. Chen, its power remained deeply personal. She thought about Eleanor standing for that formal portrait in June 1903, wearing an elaborate wedding gown, standing beside a man she didn't love, speaking vows that denied her authentic self. She thought about Catherine positioning herself just out of frame, extending her hand to a woman she loved, creating a connection that would remain hidden for 121 years. That single gesture, that interlaced grip barely visible beneath layers of silk and strategically placed flowers, had been an act of resistance, a refusal to let that moment pass without acknowledging the truth, a way of saying, "I see you, I love you, I am here, even if the world refuses to recognize what we are." The photograph had documented a wedding, but it had also documented something more profound: the human need to be seen, to be known, to have authentic connections acknowledged even when everything conspires to erase them. Sometimes, Dr. Chen reflected, the most important stories hide in the smallest details. A hand barely visible in a wedding photograph, fingers intertwined in defiance and love, a connection preserved across more than a century, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see it. Eleanor and Catherine's story ended in those quiet graves side by side, their true relationship still officially unacknowledged. But the wedding photograph ensured that their story would not be entirely lost. That hidden hand-holding had preserved something essential, evidence that they existed, that they loved each other, that they found ways to honor their truth even in an era that demanded they hide it. The photograph stands now not just as evidence of two individual lives, but as a symbol of countless others who lived similarly hidden existences. Every wedding portrait from that era potentially contains similar secrets. Every formal photograph might hide coded messages, deliberate positioning, subtle gestures that documented truths the world refused to see. Dr. Chen ended her exhibition with a simple question displayed beneath the wedding photograph. What other secrets are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see them? Among the most moving documents Dr. Chen discovered were letters written near the end of Eleanor's life. By the 1950s, Both women were widowed, their children grown, their social obligations diminished. For the first time in decades, they had a degree of freedom they had never known in their youth. Eleanor wrote to Catherine in 1956, "We are old women now, see, and the world has changed in ways we could never have imagined when we were young. But some things remain unchanged. I still reach for your hand across any room we share. I still feel the same flutter of joy when I hear your voice. Time has not dimmed what we are to each other." Harrison Chambers had died in 1953, and Catherine's second husband had passed in 1951. Both women found themselves suddenly free of the marriages that had defined their adult lives. Their children were established with families of their own. The rigid social expectations that had governed their youth had begun to soften, though only slightly. The two women began discussing the possibility of living together. At first, it was presented as a practical arrangement between two elderly widows who could share expenses and keep each other company. But Eleanor's diary from this period revealed the profound significance of the decision. After 53 years of stolen moments, of careful distance in public, of living separate lives while our hearts remain joined, we are considering something I never dared dream possible. Eleanor wrote in early 1955, to wake each morning under the same roof, to share meals, to spend evenings together, to not count the hours until we must part. It feels almost impossibly wonderful, even as we must continue to hide what we truly are to each other. They made the move in the autumn of 1955, purchasing a small but charming house in Cambridge. The neighborhood was quiet and respectable, home to other elderly residents and young families. Eleanor and Catherine told their children and friends they were simply two old friends keeping each other company in their final years, which is considered entirely appropriate and even admirable. No one questioned the arrangement. Society viewed elderly widows as essentially asexual beings past the age of romantic involvement. Two women living together was seen as practical and proper, nothing more. No one suspected the truth behind their companionship, the depth of feeling that had endured for over half a century. Catherine's diary from this period revealed the bittersweet joy of finally living openly together, even as they maintained the pretense of mere friendship. After a lifetime of hiding of stolen moments and coded words, we now share a home, share our daily lives, share everything except the ability to call each other what we truly are, she wrote in 1957. But it is enough. After so many years of separation and secrecy, simply being together every day feels like a gift beyond measure. She described their daily routines with obvious happiness. Morning coffee together, reading newspapers side by side, tending their small garden, preparing meals in a kitchen that belonged to both of them. Evenings spent reading aloud to each other or listening to music on the radio. Simple domesticity that carried profound meaning because they had been denied it for so long. "I watch her hands as she waters the roses," Catherine wrote in June 1957, "and I remember those same hands reaching for mine during her wedding portrait 54 years ago. The same fingers that interlaced with mine then, hiding our truth beneath silk and flowers, now touch mine freely in privacy of our home. We have survived so much to reach this moment." They had visitors, of course. Their children came for Sunday dinners. Grandchildren played in their small yard. Former society acquaintances stopped by for tea. Eleanor and Catherine played their roles perfectly. Two proper elderly ladies, companions in widowhood, dear old friends. No one saw what they really were. But in the quiet hours when they were alone, they could finally drop the pretense. Eleanor wrote about the profound relief of that privacy. To sit beside her on our sofa, my head resting on her shoulder, her arm around me, without fear of discovery. To speak freely of my feelings without coding them in acceptable language. To simply be ourselves, even if only within these walls. This is what I have wanted my entire life. Eleanor's health began declining in late 1957. She had developed heart problems, and her doctor warned that her condition was serious. Catherine's diary entries from this period showed her growing fear and grief. "She is weakening," Catherine wrote in January 1958. "I watch her struggle for breath, see the pain she tries to hide, and I am terrified of what is coming. We have had barely 2 years living together like this." It feels unbearably cruel that we should have so little time after waiting so long. Eleanor died on the morning of February 14th, 1958. Valentine's Day, a bitter irony that Catherine noted in her diary. She had been sitting beside Eleanor's bed, holding her hand, when Eleanor took her last breath. Catherine's diary entry from that day was heart-wrenching in its controlled anguish. She is gone, and with her goes more than half a century of my life, the only real love I have ever known. I held her hand as she died, the same hand I held in secret during her wedding portrait all those years ago. I was able to be with her at the end, to touch her freely, to whisper words of love that I have carried inside me for 55 years. But she continued, and now comes the cruelest part. To the world, I am simply an elderly friend mourning the loss of a companion. I cannot weep as a widow weeps. I cannot claim the depth of my grief without exposing what we were. Her children plan her funeral, make decisions about her burial, receive condolences as her true mourners. I must stand aside, must accept my role as dear friend, must hide my devastation behind appropriate sadness. Even in death, we must remain hidden. Eleanor was buried in the Ashford family plot beside Harrison Chambers. As was expected, Catherine attended the funeral, sitting in a back row among distant relatives and old acquaintances. She watched Eleanor's children and grandchildren grieve, watched them bury her beside the man she had never loved, and had to remain silent about her own loss. Catherine lived 4 more years in the Cambridge house they had shared. Her diary entries from this period reveal profound loneliness. She maintained the garden they had planted together, kept Eleanor's favorite chair exactly as she had left it, continued routines they had established. She wrote letters to Eleanor that she never sent, filling pages with words she wished she had said. I am surrounded by your presence, Catherine wrote in May 1960. Your books still on the shelves, your handwriting in the margins, your coat still hanging by the door. I cannot bear to remove these things. Yet each one is a small torment, a reminder of what I have lost. I am 80 years old and have lived a long life, but the only years that truly matter were the ones I spent loving you. She made arrangements for her own death with characteristic precision. She left specific instructions that she not be buried in the Whitmore family plot with either of her husbands. Instead, she purchased a burial plot in a different cemetery, one where Eleanor's family did not have holdings. She arranged for a simple gravestone with only her name and dates. And she made one more arrangement, one that her lawyer noted but did not fully understand. She purchased a second plot immediately beside her own and had it transferred into Eleanor's name. She then contacted Eleanor's son and explained that she had made arrangements to have Eleanor's remains moved to this new location, claiming it was Eleanor's wish to be buried in a more peaceful setting away from the crowded family plot. Eleanor's children, who had been genuinely fond of Catherine and grateful for her companionship with their mother in her final years, agreed to the arrangement. They saw it as a kind gesture from an old friend who wanted to honor Eleanor's memory. They had no idea of its true significance. Catherine died in September 1962 at age 80. Her final diary entry, written the week before her death, read simply, I am ready. I have lived as fully as circumstances allowed. I have loved and been loved, even if that love had to remain hidden. Soon I will rest beside E, as I should have done from the beginning. In death, perhaps we can finally be together without pretense or fear. Dr. Chen visited the cemetery where both women were buried. It was a quiet place on the outskirts of Cambridge, shaded by old oak trees. She found the graves easily, positioned side by side on a gentle slope, overlooking a small pond. Eleanor's headstone listed her maiden name, Eleanor Ashford, and the dates 1881 to 1958. Catherine's headstone was identical in style and size. Catherine Whitmore, 1880 to 1962. The stones were positioned close together, no more than 2 feet separating them. To anyone passing by, they appear to be unrelated graves that happen to be near each other. But knowing their story, Dr. Chen understood the profound significance of that proximity. These were 2 women who had loved each other for over 60 years, who had been forced to hide their relationship behind marriages and social convention, who had finally found a way to rest together. The placement was deliberate, meaningful, a final act of connection that Catherine had carefully arranged. Dr. Chen stood between the graves for a long time, thinking about the wedding photograph that had started this investigation. That hidden hand-holding, that deliberate act of defiance preserved in an image meant to celebrate Eleanor's marriage to a man, had been a declaration, a way of saying, this is who I really am, this is what matters, even if the world cannot see it or acknowledge it. And in the end, Catherine had found another way to make that same declaration, by arranging for them to be buried side by side, away from the husbands and families and social structures that had kept them apart. She had created a final resting place that honored their truth. Anyone who knew their story would understand what those side-by-side graves meant. She organized an exhibition at the Massachusetts Historical Society in October 2024, telling Eleanor and Catherine's story through the photographs, letters, and diaries she had discovered. The wedding photograph was displayed prominently, with detailed magnified sections showing the hidden hand-holding. Beside it were photographs of the two women throughout their lives, letters expressing their love in coded language, diary entries revealing their true feelings, and finally, photographs of their graves side by side. The exhibition attracted significant media attention and thousands of visitors. Many came specifically to see the wedding photograph and understand its hidden secret. But they stayed to read the letters, to trace the arc of a relationship that had endured for 6 decades despite every obstacle society could place in its path. The image resonated powerfully with visitors who recognized their own experiences in Eleanor and Catherine's story. LGBTQ plus visitors spoke of understanding the need to hide, to code feelings in acceptable language, to find subtle ways of documenting truth. Elderly visitors talked about remembering when such relationships had to be completely concealed. Younger visitors expressed shock that people had lived with such restrictions so recently in history. Descendants of both women attended the exhibition opening. Eleanor's great-granddaughter, Margaret Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen, was 65 years old and had known nothing about her great-grandmother's hidden relationship until contacted about the exhibition. I grew up hearing stories about great-grandmother Eleanor, Margaret told Dr. Chen at the opening, her voice thick with emotion. She was described as proper, devoted to family, a perfect society wife. No one ever mentioned Catherine as more than a childhood friend who remained close throughout their lives. Learning the truth has completely changed how I understand her. Her life, her choices, her apparent contentment with circumstances that must have caused such deep pain. She was so much more complex and brave than the simple story suggested. Catherine's grandson, Thomas Whitmore, attended as well. He brought additional photographs and letters he had discovered in his grandmother's belongings after learning about the exhibition. I always wondered about the depth of emotion in her letters to Eleanor, he said. The intensity of feeling seemed beyond normal friendship, but I assumed it was simply the way women of that era expressed themselves. Now I understand it was much more. She lived an entire hidden life, loved someone deeply for decades, and none of us knew. I wish she could have felt safe enough to tell us.